Yo guys, what's going on? My name is HackingIsFreedom and welcome to the 13th episode of What Was Cut, a series where we take a look at what exactly was cut from our favorite games. Today we're going to be talking about the first Dead Rising. I'm a huge fan of the Dead Rising series and I've played every title, with Off the Record being my favorite. I figured since this game is getting a complete remaster in September, it's a great time to go over the various things that were cut from the original 2006 release. Anywho, let's make some combo weapons and figure out what was cut.
Fantastic!
There has been a lot of changes to character models over Dead Rising's development, so let's get into those first, shall we? To start with, one of the biggest changes was done to Brad. His 2005 model honestly looks like a model from GTA 3 or San Andreas, and it resembles nothing from the final game's design. In the Las Vegas build, which is also known as the pre-E3 or 0.50 build, his textures were a bit more brighter, but he became much closer to the final game's design. Another big change was done to our main man, Frank West. He originally looked pretty cartoony in the 2005 build. He honestly looks like a character from the PS2 game Leisure Suit Larry, if you guys know about that game. I have no idea why they went with this strange design originally. However, in the Las Vegas build, he got much closer to the final design. The only differences are he seems to have a bit more weight around the face area, and his jacket is a bit more darker. Carlito looked much different, especially in the face. I'm glad that they changed his look. To me personally, that 2005 look just doesn't suit him. He looks way too baby-faced. There's a cutscene that shows a girl getting eaten by zombies in the parking lot. Her name is Female Motorist, and even for a character that pretty much is only seen once, they did decide to change her appearance. She's pretty much an exact copy of Kay. Speaking of Kay, she had a bit more of a basic design in 2005, and the textures were much lower in quality. She didn't change all that much in the overall design though. Connie looked a bit heavier, and she seems to have a much more basic looking face in the E3 build. She looked pretty close to the final game in the TGS build, but it seems they wanted her to look younger in the final game, so they changed it up a bit. Kathy from the intro didn't change all that much, besides the texture used for her shirt and some added blood effects. Jessica, or Jessie, didn't change that much either. It seems her early face textures were a bit rough and a lot brighter than they should be. She also had a mole in the left side of her chin, and her eyes seemed to be a bit more of a green color in the 2005 build. This was changed to more of a blue color, and her overall textures got more smooth. Isabella didn't change that much besides her facial structure. Again, in the 2005 build, she looks like a PS2 character, and her eyes are brown. In the 0.50 build, it looks like the developers only updated her facial textures, and her eyes are now grayish in color. In 0.70, the brightness of her face was toned down, and her eyes are now green in color. The final game's version, as we all know, has blue eyes, and the earrings she's had since the start of her design are now removed. I believe this model is of the chopper pilot, which flies you into the mall when starting the game. He was changed quite a lot, but I'm guessing the 2005 version was a placeholder because you'll see him again later in this list. He honestly looks like Ellie Beast or Critical without his hair. Lindsay originally had a plain orange jacket before her design was added to it. She was also missing her belt in the 2005 build. Otis originally looked much older, with brighter white hair and freckles under his eyes. His pants got brighter too. Sophie originally looked a bit older in the face, or it just could be the makeup. She seems to have a basic shirt and white or just really bright shoes. Gordon was changed drastically. The basic outline is there, but his face and clothing are completely different. I'm not sure why Capcom went with such a cartoony look in the earlier design stages. Gordon's 2005 model reminds me of that guy from Family Guy with the very close together eyeballs.
Sorry, but your house is too close to the curb.
Oh, yeah? Well, your eyes are too close to your nose.
Well, that may be. But you know what? I only have to wear one goggle when I go swimming in my pool.
This model here is of an unknown zombie. He definitely has a unique facial structure. This model reminds me of Sloth from the Goonies. I don't really know who this is, but he seems like he was very important to the story at an earlier design stage because he has some sort of symbol engraved on his forehead. I thought maybe this was the symbol for the cult that kidnaps Frank later in the game, but this symbol appears triangular. This model, I believe, was used as either a test NPC or as a placeholder in an earlier stage of development. As you can see, he seems to reuse textures from Sextus from the game Shadow of Rome. There's a few test NPCs with differently colored shirts that I'm guessing were all used as placeholders. This first one is pink, and apparently the Japanese text translates to shotgun. There's a blue shirt model with Japanese text that apparently translates to bat. Another one in yellow that translates to husband. Perhaps this was an early model for Jeff? The last one has a gray shirt, and apparently the text on his shirt translates to iron vibrator. I have no idea if that's correct or not because I use Google Translate for each of these, and sometimes, as we know, Google Translate has issues. If there happens to be anyone out there watching my video that also knows Japanese, please let me know if this is correct in the comments. The dead or zombie version of Brad was completely missing his guts in the Las Vegas build. This model here I believe is of Kathy, and her early zombie version is way different than the final. Here's that same model from earlier being used as a placeholder for this zombie character as well. This zombie model was way more cartoony looking than in the final. Again, this just looks so goofy. I have no idea why the developers thought this looked good. Jesse's zombie model originally looked a lot more pale, and I personally like this one a lot more. This may have been changed for time continuity reasons, as the 2005 version looks like she's been a zombie for a long time. Natalie's zombie model, which is only used in a cutscene, actually has another unused variant. Nothing really is different besides her skin and the color of clothing. The lumberjack zombie looked pretty different in the 2005 build. As you can see, he seems to be using that sloth-looking face from earlier. Other than the blood on his pants, nothing else was changed. Here's another early version of the lumberjack zombie face. As you can see, it was much more like the final games. This zombie here only went through a slight change, mainly with his clothing. This same zombie's face went through a few design changes as well. I love how goofy the source model looks. Here we have some zombie shirts, and a test shirt intrigues me. And finally, for the character models, there's a low poly version of a zombie that was used for testing. These next few models are just random models I thought were interesting. The walkie-talkie looked a bit different in the betas. It basically just had a black border around the device, similar to real-world Motorola walkie-talkies. Perhaps that was the issue, but I really like the old design better. The helicopter drone was a lot more basic in earlier builds. It seems the developers didn't quite know what to put on the drone as a design, so it was left white. The truck that has an advertisement of Michelle Club was originally not damaged. This was probably just because they didn't have the damaged model ready, or even planned out at that point. The army truck that's driven by the Psychos was literally a Hummer H1. In the final game, it was obviously changed to only resemble the Hummer. Now let's go over the various models that are still left over in the final game. Like this realistic looking Claymore, this was later added to Dead Rising Off the Record. It seems there were plans for using binoculars in some way. My personal guess is they were going to be used for a mission. For some reason, two other versions of the hunk of meat item is still left over. One having gray skin color, and the other having a black skin color. These would obviously drop from the zombies with the corresponding skin color. The fire extinguisher originally had its own housing in earlier builds. This was later changed to just being on a wall or floor in the final game. There's a model of a notebook that goes unused in the final game. It's not really known what this would have been used for, but my guess is this was used as an early watch UI, or maybe even as an early pause menu. I'm thinking similar to how the notebook worked in Shenmue. There's also a model of a welding mask, and I'm not sure if this was supposed to be used as clothing, as a weapon, or maybe even as protection, because there's also a model of a flamethrower as well. Nothing like this is seen in the final game. For some reason, there's a leftover model of Frank's jacket in gray. This was never seen in any builds that we know of. Maybe this was supposed to be a recolor that you could unlock, or maybe get from DLC. Frank also has a leftover model of his normal boots, but untextured. These were probably just a leftover from an older build, as they're labeled as shoes old. These two models here are labeled as rhinestones, and these are either intended for clothing or as a throwable weapon like the throwable gems. Again, if you believe Google Translate, this Japanese text translates to clock. However, these two models are the exact same, just in different angles, but Google says the one on the right translates to melt, even though the text is the exact same. I have no idea what this bloody club was used for. It doesn't really look like a baseball bat. However, this could just be a placeholder weapon. There's also a bloody stick with some sort of steel object on the one side. And finally, there's a temp model labeled as gum. I'm guessing this was going to be an early stab at making the bubble gum from the gumball machines an actual object, but it seems that was cut real early in development. This was probably going to be a food item as well. As for textures, we don't really have many to talk about, just some changes to the guns and the HUD elements. The assault rifle looked way more realistic. It honestly looks like a model straight out of Call of Duty. I have no idea why this was changed. Something pretty funny is I was just talking about how realistic that last weapon looked. Now take a look at the early pistol texture. Oof. For some reason, to me, it looks like a clay gun or something from Roblox. The shotgun's textures were originally modeled after the Remington 870 Marine Magnum shotgun, which looks the best to me, although we ended up with an older looking model. The battle axe looked a bit different than the Las Vegas build, and I personally like this one a lot more. The one we got in the final game just looks very bland to me. There's an unfinished weapon in the files called Beam Gun, and that's where this texture comes from. I showcased this weapon later in the video. The Death Cart, as I like to call it, was originally clean in the Las Vegas build. I'm sure the blood effect just wasn't ready yet. The camera HUD was quite different in earlier builds. This specific one was seen in a late 2005 build. I personally think this version is much better because you can see much more of your surroundings. The controls were likely a bit different as well. This is the earliest HUD that was designed for Dead Rising, and this was from an unknown build in 2005. You can see there's no guide arrow, nor is there a kill counter yet. This HUD was seen in a build that was just before the 2006 Tokyo Game Show. You can see the color scheme was more of a goldy yellow color here. The guide arrow and kill counter are still missing. However, this is the first build to feature the whole checking your watch mechanic. This was the pause screen of another earlier build, and this one would be just after the 2006 Tokyo Game Show. You can see the developers went with a green color scheme here, and this would be the loading screen from this build as well. Finally, this pause screen was used in the 2006 0.70 build, which I believe is roughly 4 months away from release. You can see this is where we got the traditional blue color scheme. Next up, let's talk about the few cut weapons. Carlito's sniper can actually be used by the player, and it has the name of anti-materia rifle, which you normally can't see. It reuses the handgun animation when being held by Frank. There's a gun left over in the files called Beam Gun, and it seems this was cut late in development. Its textures show up glitched because they're not mapped correctly to the model. This is what it's supposed to look like. If you fire this weapon, the game will immediately crash. Lastly, we have a very broken version of the fire extinguisher. This was supposed to be featured, I believe, in the 0.70 build, but it was blocked off from the player as clearly it wasn't finished yet. There's a lot more weapons that have been cut, but I'd like to direct you to Stippo's channel if you want to see more, as well as other development history on Dead Rising. Obviously, a big thanks to Stippo for originally documenting these weapons. Next up, we have a few cut voice lines, and a lot of them are from Steven Chapman, which is the psychopath you fight in Sion's Food and Stuff.
Get your hands off my stuff! Guaranteed fresh or your money back! I don't allow vandalism here! My store. My beautiful store. This is my store, damn it! Welcome to our fine shop! We've got everything you need! We've slashed our prices! You won't get away with this!
And these last two are for a man Frank. Sadly, they're pretty generic.
Stop! What the hell are you doing?
I believe that second line was added to Dead Rising off the record when hitting Frank in co-op. Now we're going to talk about some prototype maps. In the Las Vegas build, all of the areas that give the illusion of the map being connected all use prototype or blockout versions of the areas, so we can actually see some difference in level design here. For example, here's the unloaded version of Leisure Park. You can see that this is basically a prototype of the layout. Everything's flat, there's no water textures or even areas where the water would go, and the clock tower has its basic shape. It basically looks like a rough draft of the park's path layout. Here's the prototype version of Entrance Plaza. You can see there was just a basic fountain here. I'm guessing there wasn't even plans of having the clock tower here yet. Also, on the top floor near the back of the plaza, there was originally a lot more stores here. In the final game, we only got 2. Lastly, we have a prototype of the food court. I love all the basic coloring here, but it seems the map wasn't quite scaled for Frank, as there's many jumps you simply can't make. There's more prototype blockout maps, but please check out Stippo's channel if you want to see those. As we come to the end of the video, it's time for the various oddities that couldn't fit anywhere else. It seems that at an earlier point in development, the doors to Entrance Plaza would automatically open at 10 AM. This may have just been because Capcom was uncertain about how to start the story, as this picture is from an unknown build from 2005. In a 2005 build, there's a part where it seems the glass is cracking with the amount of zombies pressed against it. The footage where this picture was taken cuts off before the glass is actually shown breaking, so it's up to speculation if this feature was planned to be added or not. The blood texture was originally much brighter and a lot more cartoony looking. This was from a late 2005 build. In the earliest public showing of Dead Rising, you were originally able to carry multiple two-handed weapons in your inventory without dropping them. This may have just been for the promotional art, but the sheer amount of zombies that used to spawn in the tunnels was truly absurd. This was also the case for Al Fresco Plaza around the fountain. The explosion effect was a lot more green screen looking, and what I mean by that is, it doesn't look like an effect made in a game engine. It looks a lot more like a movie explosion, if that makes any sense. This was from an early 2005 build, when Frank had his cartoony look. When being grabbed by a zombie, you originally needed to mash A, Y, X, or B in order to get the zombie off of you. This was changed to using the left stick in the final game. At a very early point in development, it seems Jessica was planned to be killed off by either a zombie or by Carlito in his truck. These 3 pictures show a sequence of Jessica running down an empty maintenance tunnel. She's then seen slumped over. This sequence was changed to Brad being killed here instead. In the Las Vegas build, Days Survive would be shown as Days in Hell. I like this one a lot more. For some odd reason, in the Las Vegas build, Frank's bare feet aren't textured, and this just looks really weird. The fountain in Leisure Park completely lacked a water texture, and the water texture used for the pond was basically a giant mirror. This was only seen in the Las Vegas build. In the 0.70 build, the bookstore had banners in the store that would show its original name, that being the Book Nook. You can also see here there was a typo when spelling sense. The developer spelt science without the C.
Like tomato, but without the tuh.
Also, the picture in the background has a pink circle in the corner. That was a placeholder indicator for the art team. Speaking of the bookstore, it was called Leisure Time Books in the beta before it was changed to Everybody Loves Books in the final game. Jason Wayne's Sporting Goods was originally called Rick's Sporting Goods in the beta as well. There's a few strange screenshots of Isabel using Carlito's sniper. I have no idea what stage of development this was from. Maybe Capcom originally planned to have Isabel's and Carlito's roles swapped? An advertisement that appears in both Kathy's Boutique and Lady's Space has a placeholder texture written in Japanese. This can be seen in the 0.50 beta build. Infinity mode wasn't fully complete in the 0.70 build, however, you can still somewhat access it with modding. It seems to use crude placeholder images, and I always love seeing these. Also in the 0.70 build, for some reason, bullets didn't fully break glass, they would just put holes in it. Finally, there's an unused running animation that was supposed to play when you have the full Mega Man suit equipped. This was obviously cut late in development, as you can still re-enable it in the final game. And that's all I have for the original Dead Rising. Once again, a huge thanks to Stippo for originally documenting a lot of what you saw here. If you enjoyed, please go check out Stippo's channel for way more in-depth coverage of Dead Rising. Link will be in the description. Also, a big thanks to Unigooner for suggesting this one. I can't wait for the new Dead Rising remaster, and I also hope to see Stippo uploading again, as I'm a big fan of his content, and he's done so much for the Dead Rising community. Anywho, if you have a suggestion for the next What Was Cut episode, please feel free to comment down below. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.